Once a week in Destiny 2, an NPC named Xur comes out of hiding and sells exotics to Guardians for legendary shards. This week he's in the Giant Scar on IO, but unfortunately most of the exotics he's selling aren't very interesting to me. So instead of doing a showcase of his entire inventory, we're going to look more in depth into one, specifically the Dune Marchers for the Titan. Let's get started. It's always a little bit unfortunate for me when Xur isn't selling a lot of exotic armor pieces that are influential in PvE, because that's the side of the game I'm most interested in, but the Dune Marchers are pretty cool and they have a lot of room for optimization. So we're going to go in today and see just how far we can push this exotic armor piece with the Charged with Light system and our subclass selection. So, for anyone who doesn't know about the Dune Marchers, their exotic perk is called Linear Actuators. It increases sprint speed, and sprinting builds up a static charge. After melee attacking an enemy, that charge will chain damage to nearby enemies. The Dune Marchers also have a hidden effect of increasing your slide distance. The damage caused by linear actuators isn't insane, it's not anything crazy, but it's extra damage. It's pretty easy to trigger it as long as you're getting into melee range. Now for our melee ability, we're going to be playing as the Code of the Commander. And the melee ability Tactical Strike, it does not deal a lot of area damage, but it does apply our Void Detonators to all the enemies it hits. And with linear actuators on the Dune Marchers, those Void Detonators will most likely be triggered once the shock of chained lightning damage goes out. So we got kind of a 1-2 combo. We boom, go in, punch with Tactical Strike, and then linear actuators comes out and triggers controlled demolition for us. For Charged with Light, we're going to mess around with Heavy-Handed so that we can get our melee ability back more often. While Charged with Light, you regain half of your melee energy when you use a charged melee ability. In order to generate those charges, I'm using Quick Charge. Whenever I rapidly defeat multiple enemies with a fusion rifle or a shotgun, I gain a stack. And when they say rapidly defeat, they just mean a double kill, and they're pretty generous about the amount of time you can spend in between kills in order to become charged. The last bit of Charged with Light that I have in the setup is stacks on stacks. I gain an extra stack of Charged with Light for every stack that I gain. So after I get a double kill with my shotgun, I will get 2 stacks instead of 1. So what we're going to do now is head into a lost sector on the moon, and I completely lied. We're not going into a lost sector. We're going into the Insight Terminus Nightfall, because it's a little bit easier to see the power and effectiveness of a setup like this when the enemies can take a little bit more damage before they die. So the main thing that I'm gonna try to do here is use my melee ability only when I am charged with light, so I can take advantage of Heavy-Handed. That's one thing that takes a bit of an adjustment with the Charged with Light system, is always using your abilities on a sort of rotation and having the system working in the correct order at all times, the order of operations, that PEMDAS going on. So before I go in and punch something, I want to get a double kill with my shotgun. Boom, boom, I'm charged with light. There is just one enemy here, so I'm not even going to bother punching him. I'm just going to kill him. But I'm charged with light. Going into this next area, I will be able to make use of all the cool explosions. But first, let's deal with that guy. Now we got a big cluster of enemies. I'll go in and punch. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like linear actuators did all that much to the clustering of enemies, but we've got another one that we can send out. So let's do it. See what happens. Linear actuators, the shock comes out, but it doesn't hurt as much as I would like it to, and that's one of the unfortunate things about linear actuators. The damage isn't insane, but it feels nice, because the third time I procced it, it felt pretty good. The shock wound up triggering some of the detonators that I had going on, and that felt pretty good. So we're going to keep rocking and rolling with this, try and make the best out of what we have. My melee is cooling down right now, but I'm not charged with light either, so let's go ahead and build that up. I'll throw a grenade on those guys to get the resupply passive to trigger. We've got our melee again. So now for this next bit, I'm just going to reload my shotgun, and I'm going to run in and punch something. Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, the little extra zaps from the linear actuators, the stagger is probably the best part about it. It's sort of rendering some of the enemies unable to fight back a little bit, and that feels pretty good. And then the void detonators are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. All right. I'm going to use the tractor cannon here to get my charged with light ×2, and then we go in for the punch. That was kind of the perfect example of what this is going to look like when everything is working as intended. The void detonators will get applied, and then the nearby enemies will get shocked and trigger the secondary detonation, or at the very least, they will weaken the enemies enough so that a quick follow-up will kill them. There's definitely massive devastation that's going on, but I feel like the majority of it is a result of the void detonators and not so much because of the linear actuators, which is a little bit unfortunate. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to back out, and we're going to change our subclass and continue experimenting. I'm going to keep all of the same armor pieces and the same weapons, and we're going to continue using heavy-handed, but we're going to approach it in a different way, in a slightly different way. And I've been debating this for a little while with myself because I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Dune Marchers since the Season of Dawn started, and a part of me wants to try it with the top tree Sentinel. There is a nice effect with its melee ability Defensive Strike. Final blows grant melee energy when the overshield for Defensive Strike is active. And linear actuators could potentially make it easier to chain kills together rapidly while you have your Defensive Strike overshield up. So that's something interesting that we could do. Another thing that could be fun to do with the linear actuators is the bottom tree of the Sunbreaker, the Code of the Siegebreaker, the Mortar Blast melee ability. Strike an enemy with this melee ability to release a solar explosion, setting nearby enemies on fire. This melee does horrible damage, but the burn that it applies, if the enemy is killed while it's burning, then it will create a sunspot and it will trigger a small heal. So that's pretty cool as well. So I'm thinking Mortar Blast could be a lot of fun because sunspots are incredibly powerful. So trying to trigger more of those because of linear actuators could be really nice. And we'll get to see just how potent linear actuators is when it's not being assisted by the void detonators from the Code of the Commander, which were carrying us pretty hard. So heavy-handed had some nice value for us there. When we went in to punch the Harpy, we were charged with light, and that allowed me to get 50% of my melee cooldown back. And then when I killed the Harpy, it was still burning, so it triggered a sunspot, and that allowed me to get my melee ability cooldown refreshed in, it was about 5-6 seconds or something like that. But the main thing that I'm having to pay attention to with linear actuators in content like a Nightfall, where enemies are actively trying to shove their guns down my throat, is I'm not invincible. I'm not a god, and I've got to be careful about how I approach, especially when I'm playing solo, because every single enemy has their guns trained on me, and there's no one else to draw fire away from me. Alright, so this was a pretty controlled environment. The linear actuators effect took a red bar goblin inside this Nightfall down to about 1/3 of its health. It made it finishable, which is actually kind of cool. That's something that we can use to our advantage now that we know that as a fact. We can try to leverage that a little bit. Let's get rid of that guy. Punch him. Punch him again. Now we chill in the sunspot for a little bit, get our melee back, and continue pushing forward. These three guys are kind of the perfect candidate to get punched by linear actuators. We've got some hobgoblins across the way. In the Nightfall ordeal, those hobgoblins are barrier champions, which is a bit more difficult to deal with. Created a sunspot down there on the Minotaur, so he's going to be pretty easy to kill. Unfortunately, I used my melee ability without being charged with light there, so I didn't get the cooldown reduction on it, but that's fine. Sun Warrior is helping us out a lot. Alright, this next bit is going to probably be the truest test of this setup that we can get. There's a buttload of enemies, and, well, it'll be interesting to see if I can survive it all while also creating a lot of sunspots. So I'm going to start off by killing these quantum harpies, because they're going to be a pain in the ass to deal with from close range. So first, we go in and set ourselves up. Make sure I kill the burning target so I get my sunspot, and now I can kind of chill behind cover a little bit and thin out the numbers, wait for my melee to come back, and now I can try to go in and do some more. Oh, am I gonna fall off the side? Oof. Let's get back to the sun. Alright, that quantum harpy at the top over there is causing me some problems, so I want to deal with it as quickly as possible. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I didn't really want to use my super. I wanted to see if I could clear this stuff out without it, but I don't want to die, so that's fine. Oh, hello. This is the perfect group to get hit with the punch. They get zapped, and they slowly but surely cook themselves to death because of the fire. I mean, it feels okay. It feels okay. It has its value, it has its place, but it's not the strongest exotic in the game, especially for PvE. And it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Again, with this setup, heavy-handed is doing a lot more of the heavy lifting, pun intended, than the linear actuators effect. Linear actuators really is providing a more subtle benefit. The increase in sprint speed is allowing me to close the gap a little bit easier so I can get in and start brawling with the enemies. But the actual damage that's provided by it isn't so game-changing that it feels necessary. It's just like a nice secondary effect. So overall, I still feel kind of the same love-hate relationship with the Dune Marchers. They're strong and they're cool, but they're kind of like a little bit of extra that you would throw into an already very strong build and an already very strong setup if you want to move a little bit faster, if you want to have more of a focus on close range, close the gap playstyle. But it's not a playstyle defining exotic in the same way the Hollowfire Heart is, or the Crest of Alpha Lupi, or the Heart of Inmost Light, the Insurmountable Skullfort. Those are gameplay defining, but the Dune Marchers are gameplay assisting, is how I would classify it. So we're gonna head back to orbit one more time and change up one last thing. And this time, I'm thinking the last thing that could have a potentially really awesome potential is the Sentinel top branch, the Code of the Protector, which I talked about a little bit, because of our melee ability Defensive Strike. So defeating an enemy with this melee ability creates an overshield around you and nearby allies. Final blows grant melee energy when the overshield is active. This overshield does not scale super well into higher difficulty content. Enemies just do a buttload of damage and the overshield gets ripped apart very easily. But if we combo it with heavy-handed, with linear actuators, it may be easier for us to get a nice chain of kills together, so we get a big chunk of our melee cooldown reduced whenever we use it. We're going to do the Code of the Protector, and we're going to go into the final Nightfall that is on the list, which is one of my least favorite Nightfalls to do solo, and that is the Hollowed Lair. This Nightfall just has way too many enemies when you're playing solo, and it has a lot of elements in it too. I should probably bring all three. I've got Arc from my Black Scorpion, Solar from the Xenophage, and Void from the Subclass. The main thing that we're going to see here is that it's going to be a lot easier for us to maintain our charges with light, because the Code of the Protector's melee ability doesn't get used as often, because it doesn't have as much cooldown reduction as the other subclasses that I was playing. So I still want to become charged before I send out the melee ability, and now that I am charged, I want to start going off. I want to start getting as many kills as I can while that overshield is active, so I get cooldown reduction. And my melee ability is already back because courtesy of mostly heavy-handed. So now the next time I do want to go in, I can do so with the knowledge that I will be protected once I do. Please don't go into your pool. Thank you. So I've got the overshield up, just a couple of kills, and I should get it back once again. This is going to be a lot. Whoops. That's what I wanted. It's going to be a lot of enemies over here, so I'm going to have to play a little bit more passive. I'm going to let them push into my barricade so they get stunned, and I can get a nice, easy double kill, trigger defensive strike with the charged with light. Now, this is actually feeling a lot better than the last setups because the overshield that applies instantly when I get a kill with my melee ability makes going into that melee range feel a lot safer. Because as long as I set things up correctly for myself, as long as I make sure that I weaken a target before I actively go in to try and punch it in the face, it feels very, very safe. And then as long as I have just the tiniest sliver of overshield remaining, I can get a couple of kills from long range with my scout rifle to completely reset the charge. Now, I don't have a lot of shotgun ammo left, but I think that guy just dropped a couple of bricks for me, so I can try to get a nice double kill again before I go in to punch something else. Now, this is feeling significantly more fluid than the previous setups that we were using. It feels like it's working a little bit more intelligently. So this might potentially be something that I take into other environments like the Sundial and even the 980 Nightfalls and stuff, just because of the extra safety that I have. There's a lot of enemies here, and I'm just trying to find the best way to approach them. And I do want to still become charged with light, so I'm looking for an easy double kill with my shotgun, and there we go. So again, just a couple of kills is going to allow me to get my full melee ability back, and now I can go in and punch one of those guys to get another overshield. So let's do it. This feels really good. Mr. Tiki Torch guy over here, he's coming in. I'm going to punch him because I'm still charged with light. I'm getting a pretty good uptime on this overshield as well. I know there's still an enemy behind me as well. I'm just going to go in and get that guy with the punch. Linear actuator is going to make that guy finishable, and I'm going to send him through the wall. That's fine. Okay, we're done. We're totally done here. But this, okay. Every time I come into this frickin' strike, I end up dying to some shenanigans. I completely forgot about the snipers. But I think we've discovered something kind of fun here and something surprisingly effective. I think I may have finally found the most enjoyable usage of the Dune Marchers for myself personally. And it is surprisingly with the top branch of the Sentinel, the Code of the Protector. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to go into a lost sector. Now we're going to go to the moon. And where's the moon? Here's the moon. And I'm going to talk through the rotation that I was doing a little bit more in an environment where enemies aren't going to completely obliterate me. Okay, now that we're in the K1 Revelation, we can look at all of this stuff working together in a much simpler environment. In a place like this, and possibly even some areas of the Sundial, it's definitely going to be possible to get something like a 100% uptime on your overshield because of the sheer volume of enemies that you're facing. And linear actuators is going to make that even easier, because if I go in and punch something, linear actuators right there killed 3 extra enemies, and that fed into the defensive strike ability and gave me some extra cooldown reduction. So as you can see, I've already got it back, so I can go in, punch another set of enemies, and reapply my overshield before it wears off. So like these 2 guys right here, boom, the overshield's reapplied. I'm currently out of charges with light, so before I go in for another punch, I want to get it back, and then here we go. We've got a nice little gameplay loop going on, and it's a pretty effective one at that. The main frustration that I've always subtly had with linear actuators is that it is a bit dangerous to run up to enemies and punch them if you don't have something like an instant overshield to apply to yourself. But with this, as long as I've done my due diligence, let's say, and set up an enemy for myself to get killed by a single punch, I can feel very confident about running in and going for the punch. So we've got a pretty good system going on here, and I like this. I may have finally discovered a way to use linear actuators in the Dune Marchers that feels pretty good to me. Because I've experimented with it before on the Code of the Devastator, the baby hammer titan, and it never felt as good as it should because that branch of the Titan does not have the ability to instantly bring its health back up to this perfectly safe place with an overshield. And there we go. That's going to do it for our exploration of the Dune Marchers for today. Again, I was a little bit surprised that I wound up enjoying them the most with the Code of the Protector, though it makes the most sense why I am. That overshield is protecting me from my reckless behavior. Running in and punching enemies in the face is not something that is advisable. Don't try this at home. But if you do have that extra defense to apply to yourself via defensive strike, then it's a lot safer and damaging and weakening enemies so that you can chain kills together to trigger the cooldown reduction from defensive strike feels really nice. So with all of that said, how do you feel about the Dune Marchers? What is your favorite setup to use with them? Me personally, I'm almost always going to use them with the Code of the Protector and heavy-handed from now on. Last but certainly not least, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Destiny 2. The name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.